we have to reduce strategic mistrust. And you know, the core of the gap between the U.S. and China over North Korea is really about the future of the Korean Peninsula,
Yes.
right? And that's a geostrategic issue over preferred end state. The U.S., I think, is supporting unification under Seoul and wants to maintain an alliance with a unified Korea. I don't think the U.S. has any interest in moving troops north. China can accept unification if it can be assured that there is no alliance and that the unified Korea is friendly to China, right? But those visions of the new stable Korean peninsula are different from each other.
Yes.
They're actually fundamentally different from each other.
Well, I think it's culturally, I don't know.
Well, just in terms of preference,
Okay.
it's just different preferences in terms of, especially in terms of the orientation of a unified Korea. And then there's the issue of who's going to pay for it, right? So there's a lot of issues like that are all tied up in this. And so, I mean, for China, the fundamental issue is as long as the status quo can continue, it's an atmosphere of certainty, and it's a deferral of costs, pushing it down the road. But at a certain point, we can't push. Everybody's been willing to kick the can down the road.
Yes.
But you know, ultimately, there may not be more road. And for the U.S., you know, that point is if North Korea is able to hit the U.S. with a nuclear weapon on an ICBM. So time is running out. And at that point, the U.S. is going to be under a lot of pressure to use force in order to prevent DPRK from threatening the United States. And frankly, at that point, we move into a situation where the U.S. may plausibly be able to take that kind of action and have it be understandable to everybody, right? Because if we take a preemptive action with evidence that North Korea is actually preparing to launch something, then it's self-defense, right?
What kind of things? What kind of things?
Oh, well, what I'm saying is that right now, North Korea does not have the capability to launch a nuclear weapon at the United States. But they've threatened to do it. So they've expressed intent, but they don't yet have the capability, right? If they develop the capability and they keep on expressing that intent, then as soon as the United States gets intelligence that there is something going on that looks like an ICBM launch, then it's going to be an obligation of the United States to defend its core national security interests, right? So that's actually the point at which military force becomes unavoidable. Right now, we're probably at least a year or two away from that, okay? And so, but that circumstance also puts a lot of pressure on the U.S. and China to work with each other. Right? It puts pressure on the U.S. The U.S. doesn't know what to do, so it's putting pressure on China to put pressure on North Korea, right? So we've got this cycle of pressure going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we still need to work together to deal with this problem.
Well, that's the ideal. It's a
Okay.
question of whether we can actually do it, because the United States and China have so far a limited convergence of interest.
Yes.
It's not a complete convergence of interest. It's just limited. It's limited to denuclearization. But on the question of how do we achieve denuclearization, the U.S. and China still have some differences.
Yes, as you said, there are some differences between U.S. and China
Yeah.
on solving this problem. So, how does America deal with these differences, and what influences will this bring about China-U.S. relations?
Well, so the main way that the Trump administration is dealing with it is by making North Korea top priority in the U.S.-China relationship. And essentially by putting pressure on China to cooperate more on, not on military, but on economic pressure toward North Korea. So right now, the United States has tried to strengthen sanctions, and according to the UN Security Council resolutions, but it's still not working, right? And so the next step is to put sanctions on North Korea's business partners, right? Well, North Korea's business partners are primarily Chinese companies, right?
Yes, that's true.
So Chinese government is in a dilemma because Chinese government is cooperating on multilateral sanctions, but the United States is also threatening unilateral sanctions on these Chinese business partners, right? Another way of putting it is there are two ways to put pressure on the Chinese business partners. One would be for Washington to call Beijing and say, oh, by the way, this company is doing business with North Korea, can you please stop it, right? And then hopefully the Chinese side would stop it, but if they don't do it, then the United States could threaten to just announce to the world that this company is doing business with North Korea, so the rest of the world system should not do business with that company.
Okay.
That's what the secondary sanction means, is that kind of approach. There's
We
only
really want to see that.
right.
Yeah.
So the really big problem that we have, that might be fine for the what is it? Dandong small parts manufacturing, right?
Yes.
That does 75% of its business with North Korea.
Yeah.
Maybe ultimately the Chinese government would say, okay, we'll sacrifice that small company.
Oh, no
Maybe.
way.
Well, let's say it's only doing well compared to,
Yeah.
let's say, Bank of China, which also, I guarantee you, there are North Korean companies that have accounts at Bank of China,
Okay.
right? So it's kind of a chicken game between Washington and Beijing.
Yes.
Honestly, I don't think that it's if the U.S. were to unilaterally sanction the Bank of China and to try to isolate it from the international system, well, that would make the Chinese government very upset.
Yes.
It would be a real confrontation, right? And so
Definitely,
that's the challenge, right? Is how far can you go in terms of trying to put pressure on North Korea? So the best way to do that is to really request China to fully enforce the sanctions against North Korean firms. But the problem for China, part of it is an enforcement issue, which is will China do it? But then there's also an additional piece, and that is that even if China fully enforces it, they may not know who all the North Korean business partners are. And frankly, the U.S. probably doesn't know either, because they're using a bunch of front companies, and honestly, some Chinese companies that are working with North Korea are actually gang related or illegal acts.
Thank you so much.